On Christmas Eve, a black family facing eviction is forced to leave their home, setting the stage for a life-changing encounter that will forever alter the course of their lives. Imagine being told to leave your home on Christmas Eve with no place to go and nowhere to turn. This is the heartbreaking reality for Evelyn and her children as they face a cold, harsh eviction from their landlord, Tanya. But when everything seems lost, a powerful act of compassion emerges that shows us the true spirit of the holiday season. A chance encounter, an unexpected gesture, and an apology transform not just their lives, but the hearts of everyone involved. Stay with us to see how kindness can heal even the deepest wounds, and how the unlikeliest of connections can lead to a new beginning. Don't skip. This is one story you won't want to miss. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Evelyn adjusted the red ribbon on the small box she had just wrapped, her hands trembling slightly. The modest living room was warm and inviting despite its simplicity, the glow of the Christmas tree lights casting a soft sparkle on the children's eager faces. Jackson, 9, was carefully placing gumdrops on the gingerbread house while his younger sister, 6-year-old Maya, giggled as she attempted to frost the roof without getting any on her hands. The faint scent of cinnamon cookies baking in the oven added to the holiday cheer Evelyn worked so hard to create. "Mommy," Maya piped up, her voice brimming with excitement. "Do you think Santa will like our cookies?" "Of course, sweetheart," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but filled with love. She stroked her daughter's curly hair gently, smiling despite the ache in her heart. Evelyn knew that this Christmas was hanging by a thread. She'd done everything she could to shield her children from the harsh reality of their financial struggles. But the truth was, they were running out of time and options. A loud, sharp knock at the door shattered the tranquil moment. Evelyn froze, the sound reverberating through the room. Her stomach churned as she exchanged a glance with Jackson. The boy's smile faltered slightly, his instincts picking up on his mother's unease. "Maya, stay with your brother," Evelyn said, her voice steady but tinged with unease. She smoothed her sweater nervously and walked to the door, her heart pounding. When she opened it, there stood Tanya Jenkins, the landlord. Tanya's figure was rigid, her tailored black coat impeccable even in the chilly evening wind. Her sharp gaze locked onto Evelyn, and in her hand was a folded piece of paper. Evelyn's heart sank. "Good evening, Evelyn," Tanya said curtly, holding out the paper without so much as a greeting. "I assume you know what this is." Evelyn hesitated before taking the notice. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the text that confirmed her worst fears, an official eviction notice. The paper felt heavier than it should have, its weight pressing down on her chest like a boulder. "Mrs. Jenkins," Evelyn began, her voice faltering as she looked up. "Please, Spare me the explanations," Tanya interrupted coldly. "You're 2 months behind on rent. I've given you more than enough time to sort this out." Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, closing the door slightly behind her to shield her children from the conversation. She fought to steady her breathing. "It's not what you think," she pleaded. "My boss promised to fix a payroll issue, and the money should have been deposited weeks ago. It's just a mix-up." Tanya let out a dry laugh. "A mix-up? Evelyn, do you take me for a fool? I've heard every excuse in the book. The money's coming. It's a misunderstanding. Do you think the bank cares about your mix-ups when my mortgage is due?" Evelyn's face flushed with embarrassment and desperation. "It's the truth," she insisted. "Please, just give me until the end of the month. I'll get everything sorted. I swear." "Swearing doesn't pay the bills," Tanya snapped, folding her arms. Her voice was as icy as the wind whipping around them. "Christmas or not, the rules don't change. You knew the rent was due, and you failed to pay. That's not my problem. Inside, Jackson and Maya had crept toward the door, their small faces peeking out from the crack. Maya clung to her brother's arm, her innocent eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Is Mommy in trouble?" "I don't know," Jackson whispered back, his jaw tightening as he tried to stay strong for his little sister. But the knot in his stomach betrayed his calm demeanor. He didn't understand the details, but he could tell something was very wrong. Evelyn's voice cracked as she tried again to reason with Tanya. "Please, Mrs. Jenkins. It's Christmas Eve. My kids." Tanya cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Christmas Eve, New Year's, Easter. It doesn't matter. I'm running a business, not a charity. If you can't pay, you can't stay. End of story." Evelyn swallowed back tears, her pride clashing with her desperation. "Just a few more days," she begged. "That's all I'm asking. I have 2 children." Tanya's eyes flickered toward the window, where she briefly caught sight of the small Christmas tree glowing in the corner of the room. Her lips tightened. "If you have time to decorate a tree and bake cookies, you should have spent that time finding a way to pay your rent." Evelyn was stunned silent, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find words. Before she could respond, Tanya took a step back, her stance firm and unyielding. "I've already been more lenient than I should have been. You have until morning to pack up and leave." With that, Tanya turned and strode toward her car, the sound of her heels clicking against the icy driveway. Evelyn watched her go, the eviction notice crumpled in her hand. Her chest felt tight, her mind racing as she thought of her children and the promises she had made to them. "Mama?" Maya's small voice broke through her thoughts. Evelyn turned to see her children standing in the doorway, their faces pale and worried. Evelyn knelt down and opened her arms, pulling Jackson and Maya close. She held them tightly, feeling their tiny hearts beating against hers. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We'll figure something out. I promise. But where will we go?" Jackson asked, his voice small and uncertain. Evelyn hesitated, her throat tightening. "We'll figure it out," she said again, more firmly this time. "As long as we're together, we'll be okay." The children nodded, trusting their mother's words despite the fear that lingered in their young eyes. Evelyn kissed the tops of their heads, silently vowing to protect them no matter what. But as she held her children close, her mind raced with unanswered questions. Where would they go? What would they do? And how would she keep the promise she had just made? The warmth of the house now felt fragile, its safety slipping through her fingers like sand. Evelyn knew she had to stay strong, but the weight of the eviction notice in her hand was a harsh reminder of just how much was at stake. Evelyn moved swiftly around the house, her movements frantic and rushed as she stuffed clothes, books, and random belongings into boxes. The once cozy and festive living room now felt like a cold, empty shell. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, its lights flickering weakly in the dim light of the room, a symbol of everything they were about to lose. Evelyn's hands trembled as she folded clothes into a suitcase, her heart aching with every item she placed inside. "Mommy, are we really leaving?" Maya's small voice broke through the whirlwind of her thoughts. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, her heart breaking as she saw the confusion and fear in Maya's big brown eyes. "Yes, baby," Evelyn replied softly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She crouched down to Maya's level, brushing a lock of curly hair from her face. "We have to go for now, but don't worry. We'll be okay. We'll find somewhere safe." Jackson stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the snow falling outside. He hadn't said much since the eviction notice had been handed to his mother, but Evelyn knew that he was struggling with the same turmoil she felt deep in her chest. Jackson had always been so perceptive, so aware of their struggles, and the look on his face was a mix of disbelief and sadness. He was too old for this kind of trauma, but too young to understand the complexities of why things had turned out this way. Evelyn swallowed hard, pushing back the tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't break down in front of her children. Not now. Not when they needed her to stay strong. She wiped her hands on her jeans, the rough fabric offering a small measure of comfort. She had to keep going, even if everything inside her screamed for her to stop. There was a knock at the door, sharp and insistent. Evelyn's heart dropped, and she turned toward it, knowing exactly who it was. Tanya Jenkins, the landlord. She hadn't expected anything different, but part of her had hoped for a miracle. Perhaps Tanya would have a change of heart. Perhaps she would show some shred of compassion. But Evelyn knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. Coming, Evelyn called, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at Jackson, who was still standing motionless at the window, and gave him a small, sad smile. "Keep an eye on your sister. I'll be right back." When Evelyn opened the door, Tanya stood on the porch, arms crossed and a smug look on her face. Her expression was cold, distant. Evelyn didn't even have to look at the eviction notice again to know what Tanya was going to say. "I told you," Tanya said, her voice sharp and dismissive. "You have until morning. I'm not going to keep waiting around for you to get your act together." Evelyn nodded, forcing herself to keep her composure. "We're packing up now. I'll be out by morning." Tanya's gaze flickered to the inside of the house, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she might actually show some empathy. But instead, Tanya's eyes narrowed as she sneered. "You've got Christmas gifts stacked under the tree, but you can't pay your rent." She shook her head, her lips curling into a mocking smile. How pathetic! Evelyn recoiled slightly, the cruel words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. The thought that anyone, could be so heartless, so indifferent to their struggles, made her feel sick. But she had no choice but to swallow her pride. There was no time for arguments or to let herself fall apart. She couldn't afford to waste time on Tanya's cruelty. "I'll be out by morning," Evelyn repeated, her voice low and controlled, her eyes locking onto Tanya's without flinching. "Thank you." Tanya didn't say anything more. She just turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement, the sound growing softer with every step until Evelyn could no longer hear it. For a moment, the only sound left in the house was the steady thrum of Evelyn's heartbeat. The air felt thick, heavy with everything left unsaid. Evelyn closed the door behind her and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a brief moment to steady herself. She couldn't believe this was happening. Not today, not on Christmas Eve. She'd worked so hard to make this Christmas special for Jackson and Maya, despite everything going wrong. She'd put up the tree, made cookies, wrapped presents. She'd done everything she could to create a sense of normalcy for them. But now, that was slipping away too. "Mommy," Maya's voice called out, and Evelyn turned around to see her daughter clutching her stuffed teddy bear, her small face filled with uncertainty. Evelyn's heart clenched at the sight. "I'm right here, baby," Evelyn said gently, crossing the room and kneeling down to pull her daughter into her arms. "We're going to be okay. I promise." Maya buried her face in Evelyn's shoulder, her tiny shoulders shaking as she tried to stifle her sobs. Jackson walked over, standing silently beside them. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with worry. Evelyn wiped away a tear and stood, gently lifting Maya in her arms. "It's time to go, sweetie," she said softly. "We'll be okay, I promise." The car was parked outside, and Evelyn's heart sank as she loaded her children into the back seat, the silence thick and oppressive. Maya clutched her teddy bear tightly, as though holding on to something familiar in the midst of all the uncertainty. Jackson stared out the window, his thoughts lost somewhere in the snowstorm outside. The familiar sights of their neighborhood, the streets they'd walked for years, seemed so distant now. Evelyn started the engine, the sound of the car's motor barely cutting through the quiet of the night. As they drove away, the small house that had been their home for so long grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. Evelyn's chest tightened as she fought back tears, but she couldn't let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of her children. In the back seat, Maya sniffled, her teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest. Jackson remained silent, his gaze fixed out the window as the snowflakes drifted past. Evelyn's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with the effort it took to keep herself steady. She couldn't show weakness. Not now. She had promised her children they'd be okay, and somehow she would make sure they were. But right now, everything felt like it was falling apart. The roads were slick with snow as Evelyn drove through the quiet streets, the glow of Christmas lights flickering in the distance. She didn't know where they would go next, didn't know what the future would hold. But she knew one thing. She wasn't giving up. No matter how cruel the world had been, no matter how dark the night, she would fight for her children, fight for their future. And with that, Evelyn drove on, determined to find a way through the storm, whatever it took. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as the weight of their situation pressed down on her chest. The car, with its cramped back seat and fogged-up windows, was now their only refuge. She glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Jackson and Maya huddled together in the back seat, both trying to stay warm under the thin, threadbare blankets Evelyn had found in the trunk. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but it wouldn't go away. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to fix everything, how to give her children the life they deserved, but the options were slim. She'd already called every friend and relative she could think of, but every single one had turned her down. Some had claimed they were busy with their own families. Others had said they simply couldn't afford to help. One even hinted that it was her fault for not being more responsible with her finances. Evelyn exhaled sharply, frustrated tears threatening to spill, but she couldn't let them see. She couldn't let them see how much this hurt. Her children, her precious kids, had no idea that the roof they'd grown up under had just been torn away from them. She had promised them a Christmas they would remember, a Christmas full of warmth, joy, and hope. But now, all she could give them was this cold car and the hollow promise that things would get better. She turned to Jackson, who had remained silent since they'd left the house. His face was pressed against the window, his eyes staring out at the snowy night, lost in thought. Evelyn hated seeing him like this. Jackson had always been the strong one, the one who held it all together when she couldn't. But even he seemed broken tonight. "Maya," Evelyn said softly, turning toward her daughter, who was curled up next to Jackson, holding on to her teddy bear for comfort. "Are you warm enough, sweetie?" she asked, trying to mask the worry in her voice. Maya nodded, her wide eyes meeting her mother's gaze. "I'm okay, Mommy," she said, though her voice was small and unsure. Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She felt so helpless. She should have done more. She should have figured this out before it was too late. But instead, here they were, struggling, uncertain, alone. Suddenly, Maya's voice broke through the silence. "Mommy, do you think Santa will still find us here?" she asked, her tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. Evelyn's heart ached at the question. Maya was so young, so innocent, and yet she understood more than Evelyn wished she did. She understood that the magic of Christmas wasn't about presents or decorations, but about love and family. And right now, that was the only thing that Evelyn could still offer her. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Of course, sweetie," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Santa knows where everyone is, and he'll find you, just like he always does. We're together, and that's what matters." She reached back to gently squeeze Maya's hand, though the gesture felt hollow. Jackson turned his head, his eyes dark with the weight of everything that had happened. "But we don't have a tree," he said quietly, his voice filled with resignation. "And no presents." Evelyn's chest tightened as she turned to face him, her eyes softening. "I know, baby," she said, her voice cracking. "But you have me, and you have your sister. And we'll be okay, I promise. Christmas isn't just about the tree or the gifts. It's about us being together, and we'll make it through this together." The words came easier now, even though Evelyn didn't fully believe them. How could she? But she needed to keep up the illusion. For her children, for their sake, she had to be the strong one. She couldn't let them see her fall apart. The night wore on, the cold seeping into the car despite the blankets, despite the snacks they shared to pass the time. Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about what tomorrow would bring, where they would sleep, how she would keep her kids safe. But tonight, all she could do was keep them warm and try to hold on to whatever shred of hope remained. As the hours passed, Evelyn heard Maya humming softly. It was a quiet, sweet tune at first, barely audible over the sound of the wind outside. But soon, Jackson joined in, his voice low but steady. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she realized what they were doing. Maya, in her innocence, was trying to make the best of the situation. She was trying to keep the magic of Christmas alive, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Evelyn smiled despite herself. It was a bittersweet smile, but it was real. She couldn't remember the last time they had sung Christmas carols together, let alone in a car parked in a dark lot on Christmas Eve. But there they were, her two children singing softly, finding solace in each other's presence. Silent night, holy night, they sang quietly, their voices blending together in a soft harmony. Evelyn's throat tightened, but she didn't stop them. She joined in, her voice shaky at first, but gradually becoming steadier as she found comfort in the warmth of their voices. All the worries, all the doubts, seemed to melt away as they sang together. In that moment, they weren't a family struggling to survive. They were just a family, and that was enough. As the car grew quieter and the music faded into the cold night, Evelyn couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They might not have a home, they might not have presents, but they still had each other. And for tonight, that was all they needed. She glanced at Jackson and Maya, who were now both resting against each other, their eyes heavy with sleep. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt all night. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for now, they were together, and that was enough. She whispered a prayer of thanks for her children, for their love, for their resilience. And with that, she leaned back in her seat, wrapping her arms around them as the cold night wrapped around their little car. Together, they would face whatever came next, and maybe, just maybe, the Christmas magic would carry them through. Tanya Jenkins sat in the plush armchair of her grand, meticulously decorated living room. The glow of the fireplace cast long shadows on the walls, and the scent of pine from the large Christmas tree filled the air. But despite the luxury surrounding her, Tanya felt a deep emptiness gnawing at her chest. She idly scrolled through her social media feed, her eyes scanning the cheerful holiday posts of friends and acquaintances. People with smiling faces, pictures of families gathered around dinner tables, and children eagerly tearing into presents. It all felt so distant, so foreign to her in this moment. Her mansion, a symbol of success and privilege, felt eerily cold, and the lavish decorations that once brought her joy now seemed out of place. The large chandelier sparkled above her, but Tanya barely noticed it. Her mind wasn't on her wealth or her beautiful home. It was on the family she had kicked out earlier that evening. The Black family, the mother Evelyn and her two children, Jackson and Maya. Their faces were still burned in her mind, and she couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's tear-streaked face as she begged for just a little more time. Tanya had told herself that she was doing the right thing. Evelyn's excuses about a payroll issue seemed like nothing more than a poor attempt to delay the inevitable. But as the evening wore on, Tanya couldn't help but feel a tug of something. Guilt, maybe. Something she wasn't accustomed to feeling. She took a deep breath and tried to push the uncomfortable emotions away, but they lingered, stubbornly hanging over her like a storm cloud. Her finger hovered over the screen of her phone as she came across another post. A photo of a family gathering, a Christmas dinner spread out on the table. The picture was warm, full of joy and togetherness. Tanya's thoughts drifted back to her own childhood. She had grown up in a modest home, far from the opulence she enjoyed now. There had been times when her family struggled, when there was more month than money, and they had to make do with whatever they could scrape together. She closed her eyes, remembering a particular Christmas many years ago, one that had stayed with her all these years. Her family had been on the brink of losing their home due to unpaid rent, and Christmas seemed like it would be just another painful reminder of how little they had. But then a stranger had knocked on their door, a woman who had offered to help, a woman who had seen their desperation and reached out without hesitation. The woman hadn't been rich or glamorous. In fact, she had seemed to have little more than a kind heart and an understanding of what it felt like to struggle. She had paid their rent that Christmas, and in doing so, she had given Tanya and her family the greatest gift they could have asked for, a roof over their heads and hope for a better future. That simple act of kindness had stayed with Tanya through the years, shaping the person she had become. Tanya opened her eyes, her vision blurry for a moment as the memory played in her mind. She could almost see that woman's face, a smile that radiated warmth, a gesture so simple but so powerful. She had never forgotten how it felt to be on the receiving end of such generosity, how it had restored her faith in humanity. But now, she was the one with the power. She was the one in a position to help, yet she had chosen not to. Instead, she had chosen to evict a family on Christmas Eve, leaving them with nowhere to go. Evelyn's pleading face had stayed with her long after they had parted ways, and the memory of Jackson and Maya, so young, so innocent, haunted her. She could still see Maya clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Tanya let out a shaky breath and closed her eyes again, trying to block out the image. She had done what she thought was necessary. She had to be firm, tough. After all, this was business. But what if it hadn't been just business? What if, just for a moment, she could have seen the family as people, not just tenants who owed rent? Her mind flashed back to that night, to Evelyn's desperate words. "Please, just a little more time," she had pleaded, her voice trembling with the weight of her situation. Tanya had brushed her off, not wanting to hear the excuses. She had already made up her mind. But now, as Tanya sat in the quiet of her mansion, the guilt was undeniable. She had always prided herself on being tough, on never letting emotions cloud her judgment. But tonight, everything felt different. The images of Evelyn and her children wouldn't go away. She tried to reason with herself, telling herself that she couldn't let emotions interfere with her decisions. She had to be strong, unwavering. But deep down, she knew that something had changed. She had crossed a line, and she wasn't sure she could come back from it. Tanya glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late, but she couldn't bring herself to sleep. Her mind was too restless, too tangled in the web of guilt and regret she had spun. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through her feed absent-mindedly. Another post about Christmas, another family celebrating together. This time, Tanya didn't scroll past it. She stopped and stared at the photo of a family sitting around a table, laughing and sharing a meal. And then, in the quiet of her lonely mansion, the weight of it all hit her. She wasn't just evicting a family. She was denying them something essential, something that every person deserves, especially at Christmas. The chance to feel safe, the chance to feel loved, the chance to have a place to call home. Evelyn and her children hadn't just lost a house. They had lost a piece of their dignity, a piece of their hope. Tanya sat back in her chair, her mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. She had acted out of cold practicality, but now she realized that there was more to life than business. There was more to humanity than profit margins and eviction notices. For the first time that night, Tanya felt a stirring inside her, a flicker of regret, of empathy, of the kind of compassion that had once been extended to her family. The kind of compassion that she had so easily dismissed in Evelyn's case. She closed her eyes once more, letting the memories of her own childhood struggles and the kindness of a stranger wash over her. Perhaps it wasn't too late to make things right. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for her to be the kind of person who had helped her family all those years ago. Maybe, just maybe, she could still offer a little kindness to a family who needed it most. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. and be the first to hear our incredible news stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Tanya had been driving aimlessly for hours, the guilt gnawing at her as the night stretched on. The city's festive lights twinkled in the distance, but no amount of Christmas cheer could lift her spirits. She had left her mansion behind in search of something to distract her, something to dull the growing weight in her chest. It was absurd to think that just hours earlier, she had been in complete control, confidently standing by her decision to evict the family. But now, nothing felt right. Her actions felt hollow, like a piece of her had been left behind with Evelyn and her kids. She turned the corner into a quiet street and found herself in front of a small convenience store, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. It wasn't a place she would typically stop, but something tugged at her, pulling her into the parking lot without a second thought. Tanya parked her car and glanced up, her eyes automatically scanning the lot. And there it was, Evelyn's car. For a moment, Tanya froze, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't expected to see the family here, so close, so vulnerable. She sat still for a few seconds, her fingers gripping the steering wheel as the reality of the situation hit her. She had kicked them out, sent them away with nothing but a cruel eviction notice and a promise of no mercy. And now, here they were, parked in front of a convenience store in the dead of night. Against her better judgment, Tanya found herself stepping out of the car. Her feet moved on their own, and before she realized it, she was walking toward the family. She didn't want to intrude. She didn't want to make things worse. But something inside her pulled her forward, urging her to see them, to understand. As Tanya approached, she noticed Evelyn first. The mother was sitting in the front seat of the car, her eyes tired, her face drawn with exhaustion. But there was something else there too, a quiet strength, a determination that Tanya hadn't expected. Evelyn wasn't giving up. Not yet. In the back seat, Tanya could make out Jackson and Maya, both curled up under blankets, their faces lit with the soft glow of a small lamp that Evelyn had apparently managed to plug into the car. It was clear they were making the best of a terrible situation, clinging to the warmth of each other in the face of adversity. Jackson was staring out the window, but Tanya could see the heaviness in his eyes, the sadness that a child shouldn't have to carry. Maya, on the other hand, had her small stuffed teddy bear clutched tightly to her chest, her head resting against her mother's arm. But what caught Tanya's attention the most wasn't just a scene of hardship. It was the sound of soft voices singing. At first, she wasn't sure if she was hearing things, but as she stepped closer, the melody became clearer. It was a Christmas carol. The family was singing, their voices blending together in quiet harmony despite the circumstances. The contrast between the song and the grim reality of their situation struck Tanya deeply. Here they were, kicked out of their home on Christmas Eve with nowhere to go, and yet they were singing. They were together. They were trying to make the best of it. Tanya's breath caught in her throat as she watched them. The image was so different from the one she had expected. When she had evicted them earlier, she had expected anger, frustration, maybe even despair. But instead, she saw resilience. She saw love. She saw a family that refused to be broken by the cruelty they had experienced. Evelyn, with tears glistening in her eyes, continued to hum along with the carol, her voice barely audible but filled with quiet strength. Maya joined in, her soft voice carrying the innocence of a child who had no idea how hard life could be. Jackson didn't sing, but his eyes had softened, and Tanya could tell that he was comforted by the presence of his family, by the bond that held them together through everything. A surge of guilt washed over Tanya, so strong that it made her knees feel weak. She felt it in her chest, this tight, heavy sensation, as if something had shifted inside her. She had taken away their home. She had taken away their safety. And now, here they were, sitting in a car in a parking lot, making the best of it. The sight was heartbreaking, and Tanya felt the tears prick at her own eyes, threatening to spill over. She stood there for a moment longer, watching the family, listening to their carol. And then, without thinking, she took a step closer. She was about to call out to them when Evelyn's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Maybe next year, we'll have a real Christmas," Evelyn said softly, as if she were speaking more to herself than anyone else. "Maybe next year, we'll have a home again." Tanya froze. The words hit her like a physical blow, and for the first time that night, she felt a sharp pang in her chest, a deep ache that wouldn't go away. She had taken so much from this family, but they still had hope. They still had each other. They still had their love. Tanya felt small in that moment, dwarfed by the strength of the family she had wronged. She could have walked away, could have ignored them, but something inside her wouldn't let her. She felt an overwhelming need to do something, to make things right. Her feet moved on their own as she approached the car, her mind racing with the conflicting emotions she felt. Could she do something? Was it too late to undo the damage she had caused? As she reached the car, Evelyn looked up, surprised but not angry. There was no bitterness in her expression, only a quiet resignation, as if she had accepted the reality of their situation. Tanya took a deep breath and, for the first time, truly saw the family she had dismissed so easily earlier. They weren't just tenants. They were people, real, human people who deserved better than what she had given them. And in that moment, Tanya made a decision. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't walk away without trying to make amends. There was still time to change. There was still time to do something that would restore a little of the kindness she had so carelessly thrown away. Tanya reached for her phone and made a promise to herself that she would find a way to help, to find a way to right the wrongs she had done. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Evelyn looked at Tanya, her eyes filled with both surprise and hope. She didn't know what Tanya's visit meant, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt all night. Hope. Tanya stood outside Evelyn's car, her heart racing as the weight of what she had just experienced pressed down on her. The emotions she had been battling all evening seemed to converge in a single, overwhelming moment. She had seen the family's strength, their unity, their ability to persevere through unimaginable hardship. And now, she couldn't shake the image of those innocent children, sitting in that car, singing Christmas carols, when they should have been celebrating at home, surrounded by warmth and love. She had taken that from them. Overwhelmed with guilt, Tanya took a deep breath and walked toward the car. The cold night air stung her skin, but it didn't matter. She barely noticed the chill, too consumed by the urgency of the moment. She needed to do something. She had to try to make it right. Tanya reached the side of the car and paused for a moment, looking at Evelyn through the window. Evelyn was sitting in the front seat, her face a mixture of exhaustion and quiet strength. She glanced up as Tanya approached, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. There was no anger, no bitterness. Evelyn had suffered, yes, but she wasn't giving up. She wasn't angry at Tanya, at least, not in the way that Tanya had expected. Evelyn was simply trying to survive. Taking a deep breath, Tanya knocked softly on the car window. The sound echoed in the stillness of the night, and Evelyn looked up, startled but not afraid. Tanya gestured for her to roll the window down. Evelyn hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. But then she slowly lowered the window, a cautious expression on her face. Tanya stood there, unsure of what to say at first. She had planned to just drop off some blankets and maybe a cup of hot cocoa, but the words were failing her. She had no script for this moment, no prepared speech. She had never expected to be here, standing in front of this family she had wronged so deeply, trying to find a way to make up for what she had done. After a long pause, Tanya finally spoke, her voice shaky with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, looking directly into Evelyn's eyes. I made a terrible mistake. I kicked you out of your home. I took away your security. I never should have done that." Evelyn's expression softened slightly, but she didn't say anything. She just listened, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. Tanya could see that Evelyn was waiting for her to continue, waiting for her to explain. Tanya swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I've been so caught up in my own problems, my own struggles, Tanya continued, her words coming faster now. I've been cold and distant and harsh. I thought I was being responsible, but I wasn't. I didn't see you. I didn't see the people behind the rent check, the family that just needed a little time. I didn't see the love, the strength you have. Tanya's throat tightened as she fought back the tears that were threatening to spill. She had spent so much of her life building walls around herself, convinced that emotions only made people weak. But now, standing here, looking at the family she had wronged, Tanya realized how wrong she had been. She had been blind to the humanity of others. And now, for the first time in a long time, she could see it. I don't know what else to say, Tanya whispered, her voice breaking slightly. But I want to make it right. I want to give you another chance. I'm offering you a place to come back. You can come back home. I'll forgive the rent, at least temporarily. I can't fix everything, but I can start by giving you a home again. Evelyn sat there in silence, absorbing Tanya's words. For a moment, there was no sound except the faint hum of the car's engine. Tanya's heart pounded in her chest, waiting for Evelyn's response, afraid of what might come next. She had no idea what the family's reaction would be. She had no idea if they would accept her offer, if they would even believe her. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice calm, but filled with a quiet strength that Tanya had come to recognize. Thank you, Evelyn said softly, her eyes meeting Tanya's. Thank you for giving us a chance. But I want you to know something. Evelyn paused, her gaze steady. This is not about the house. It's not about the rent. It's about what kind of person you are. It's about your heart. I believe in second chances, but I also believe that people need to change. It's not just about what you give us. It's about what you do next. It's about how you treat others from here on out. Tanya's heart clenched as she listened to Evelyn's words. She had expected anger. She had expected resentment. But instead, Evelyn was offering forgiveness, something Tanya hadn't expected. It was a humbling moment. Evelyn didn't just want a roof over her head. She wanted a different kind of change, a change that started in Tanya's heart. Tanya nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know how to respond. She just knew that Evelyn was right. She had been wrong, but she could be better. Tanya had the chance to prove that. I will change, Tanya promised, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. I won't make the same mistakes again. I'll do better. I'll be better. Evelyn smiled gently, a smile that carried a sense of peace and understanding. I believe you, she said simply. There was a long moment of silence, and then Evelyn reached over and opened the door to the car. Tanya, unsure of what to do, hesitated for a moment, but then Evelyn gestured for her to come inside. It wasn't an invitation to stay the night. It was an invitation to be part of their family, even if only for a brief moment. It was an invitation to share in their resilience, their love, and their ability to forgive. Tanya stepped forward, hesitant but determined. She had started something that would change her and hopefully change the world around her. She had a long way to go, but tonight she had made the first step. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but as she sat in that car, surrounded by a family that had every reason to be angry with her, Tanya felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The morning after their emotional conversation, Tanya found herself standing in front of a grocery store, a basket full of food in her hands. She had woken up with a sense of purpose, determined to do something more than just apologize. She wanted to be part of the solution, to show Evelyn and her children that she wasn't just offering a second chance because it was the right thing to do, but because she genuinely cared. It wasn't just about the rent or the house anymore. It was about the people she had wronged, the lives she had disrupted. And now, she was going to make it right, in whatever way she could. As she walked through the aisles, selecting ingredients for the Christmas dinner, Tanya found herself reflecting on the events of the previous day. the guilt, the anger, the quiet strength Evelyn had shown despite everything. Tanya had never realized how much she had been missing in her own life until she saw what Evelyn and her children had. Despite their hardships, they had love, they had joy, and they had each other. Tanya had spent so much of her life isolated, focused on her own ambitions and fears, that she had lost sight of the very things that made life meaningful. The things that made a person truly rich: compassion, kindness, and community. When Tanya finally finished shopping, she drove to Evelyn's house, her car filled with bags of food and small gifts she had picked out for Maya and Jackson. She didn't know exactly what to expect, but as she pulled into the driveway and saw the family gathered outside, her heart swelled. Evelyn was standing in the yard, smiling, while Maya and Jackson played in the snow. There was a warmth in the air, despite the cold winter day. It was a warmth that came from more than just the physical heat of a home. It was the warmth of forgiveness, of a new beginning. Tanya parked her car and got out, carrying the bags of groceries and gifts. As she walked toward Evelyn, she could see that Evelyn had been waiting for her. There was no hesitation in her movement. She didn't seem angry or upset. Instead, there was something else, something that Tanya couldn't quite put into words. It was a sense of peace, of resolution, a quiet understanding that this was the right thing to do. "Thank you for coming," Evelyn said as Tanya approached. Her voice was warm, and there was no trace of resentment. The kids had been looking forward to this. Tanya smiled, a little nervously, but she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had been so afraid of this moment, afraid that Evelyn would turn her away, that the wounds of yesterday would be too deep to heal. But instead, Evelyn was welcoming her, inviting her into their home and into their family celebration. "I brought some food," Tanya said, holding up the bags, "and some presents for the kids. I hope they like them." Evelyn looked down at the bags and then back at Tanya, her eyes softening. "I'm sure they will," she said. "Come on inside. It's cold out here." Tanya followed Evelyn into the house, and as she stepped inside, she was immediately enveloped by the warmth of the fire crackling in the living room. The house was modest, but it was filled with love and life. The decorations, though simple, were beautiful in their own way. Tanya could see the care and attention that had gone into making the house feel like a home. There were stockings hanging from the mantel, a small Christmas tree in the corner, and handmade ornaments scattered throughout the space. It wasn't a mansion, but it was everything that mattered. Maya and Jackson were sitting on the couch, eagerly awaiting Tanya's arrival. When they saw the bags in her hands, their eyes lit up and they jumped up from the couch, rushing over to greet her. "Are those presents for us?" Maya asked, her voice full of excitement. Tanya smiled and nodded. "They are," she said, handing the gifts to the children. "I hope you like them." Maya tore open the wrapping paper eagerly, and Jackson did the same, his face breaking into a wide grin as he held up a toy car Tanya had bought him. Maya's gift was a plush toy, one that she hugged immediately, her face alight with joy. Tanya watched them, her heart swelling with emotion. She hadn't expected such pure joy. She hadn't expected to be part of this moment. And yet here she was, sharing in their happiness. As Evelyn set the table for dinner, Tanya helped by placing the food she had brought on the counter. The smell of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and vegetables filled the air, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. It was a simple meal, but it was made with love. As they sat down to eat, Tanya felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just a guest in their home. She was part of their family, if only for this moment. And that feeling, the feeling of being truly seen and accepted, was worth more than anything money could buy. Throughout the meal, the conversation flowed easily. Evelyn and Tanya talked about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. There was laughter, too. The children joked around, and Tanya found herself joining in, sharing stories and asking questions. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of connection, not just with Evelyn, but with the whole family. Tanya realized then that this was the true meaning of Christmas, what it was really about. It wasn't about the presents or the food. It wasn't about the decorations or the festivities. It was about kindness. It was about people coming together, setting aside their differences and supporting one another. It was about love. As the meal came to an end, Tanya looked around the table, her heart full. She had come to this house as a stranger, someone who had hurt this family, someone who had wronged them. But now, she was leaving as something more, someone who had been forgiven, someone who had been shown compassion and grace. Tanya took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. She had spent so long being afraid of vulnerability, of letting people in. But now, surrounded by Evelyn and her children, Tanya understood that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was the willingness to be open, to be real, to make mistakes and learn from them. As they said their goodbyes and Tanya headed back to her car, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This Christmas, she had received a gift far more valuable than anything she could have bought in a store. She had been given a second chance, both by Evelyn and by herself, and that, she knew, was the greatest gift of all. The day after Christmas, Evelyn awoke with a sense of optimism she hadn't felt in weeks. She had been through so much in the past few days, losing her home, enduring the humiliation of eviction, and fighting through the emotional turbulence that followed. But now, it felt like a new chapter was beginning. The constant weight on her shoulders, the uncertainty of their future, had suddenly lifted. Her boss had called earlier that morning to confirm that the payroll issue had finally been resolved, and her paycheck was on its way. The financial strain that had been tearing at her for months was now alleviated, and the sense of relief that filled her chest was almost overwhelming. Evelyn shared the news with Jackson and Maya as they gathered around the breakfast table. The children were excited, though they didn't fully grasp the significance of it. They had been through so much already, their little hearts filled with so much fear and confusion. But the promise of stability now gave them hope. Jackson smiled brightly as he poured syrup on his pancakes, and Maya beamed as she told her mother about the new doll she had received from Tanya. "It's like everything is starting to come together, Mom," Jackson said, his voice full of hope. Evelyn nodded, her eyes a little misty as she looked at her children. "Yes, baby, we're going to be okay. We're going to start over, and things are going to get better." She smiled, her voice thick with emotion, as she tucked a strand of hair behind Maya's ear. "We're strong. We can do anything together." The day stretched ahead of them like a fresh canvas, full of possibilities. They were no longer facing the bleak, hopeless future they had feared only days before. With her paycheck arriving soon, Evelyn could pay off the bills that had been piling up. She could put food on the table without worry, get the kids the things they needed, and, most importantly, she could begin looking for a new place to live. Their home, though humble, was where their hearts were. But Evelyn wasn't just looking for a house. She was looking for stability, a sense of permanence for her family. She wanted to create a new home, one where Jackson and Maya could grow without fear of being uprooted again. As she went about her day, she couldn't stop thinking about Tanya, the woman who had once stood as an obstacle in her path, a barrier between her and the safety she needed, had become someone Evelyn never expected. Tanya had come to her with an apology, not just offering to help in the moment, but vowing to change, to make things right. Evelyn didn't know what to expect from Tanya moving forward, but she knew that the kindness Tanya had shown was a turning point for both of them. The day before had been a whirlwind of emotion, of reconciliation and forgiveness. Tanya's offer to help them, to allow them back into their home temporarily, had felt like a miracle. Evelyn had always believed in the power of kindness, but seeing Tanya's transformation firsthand was a reminder that change was possible. People could grow. People could learn from their mistakes. And sometimes, the most unexpected people could teach us the most important lessons. Later that afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing at her kitchen window, watching Jackson and Maya play outside. She was proud of them, of their resilience, of their ability to still find joy even when things seemed impossible. They had been through so much, yet they still smiled, still laughed. They were stronger than she had ever imagined. As she stood there, her phone rang, and the number on the screen was one she hadn't expected to see today. It was Tanya. "Hello," Evelyn answered, her voice cautious but hopeful. "Hi, Evelyn." Tanya's voice came through, steady and warm. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." Evelyn smiled softly. "We're doing better, Tanya. Really. My boss finally fixed the payroll issue, and the kids are doing well. Thank you again for everything." "I'm glad to hear that," Tanya said, her tone sincere. "I just wanted you to know that I'm here for you, if you need anything at all. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I'm trying to be better, to be more aware of the struggles others face. I've made a promise to myself to be more generous, to give back when I can." Evelyn's heart swelled as she listened. She hadn't expected Tanya to reach out so soon, but hearing her speak so honestly, so thoughtfully, reassured Evelyn that this wasn't just a moment of charity. It was a genuine desire to make a difference. "You're already doing it, Tanya," Evelyn said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Your kindness changed everything for us." After a brief pause, Tanya added, "I'll be in town tomorrow, and I was wondering if I could drop by and see you and the kids. Maybe we can all go grab some lunch together. I'd love to spend some time with you, get to know you better." Evelyn felt a warm rush of affection for Tanya. She had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption, but to hear Tanya's words made it feel all the more real. "That sounds great. I'll see you tomorrow, Tanya. Thank you again." As the call ended, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, things were starting to fall into place. She was rebuilding her life, one step at a time. And now, she had a new friendship to cherish, one that had grown out of forgiveness and understanding. The next day, as promised, Tanya arrived with a smile and a bag of groceries, eager to spend time with Evelyn and her family. They went out to lunch, sharing stories and laughs, and as the day wore on, Evelyn felt her faith in humanity being restored. Tanya wasn't just a landlord who had evicted them. She was now someone they could call a friend, someone who had learned the true meaning of kindness, compassion, and community. As they sat together, enjoying their meal, Tanya realized just how much she had changed. She had come to know the true meaning of Christmas. Not the commercialized version, but the real essence of it. Love, forgiveness, and the willingness to help others. And in that moment, surrounded by Evelyn and her children, Tanya knew she was on a path to becoming a better person. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and that was enough. The final shot of the scene captured them all laughing together, their smiles bright and full of warmth. The room was filled with the true spirit of Christmas, a spirit that transcended hardship, a spirit that brought them all together. As the camera pulled back, the screen faded to black, and the words appeared, "A new beginning." The screen lingered for a moment longer, as if to remind the viewers that this wasn't just a holiday story. This was a story of redemption, of healing, and of the power of kindness to change lives. This story isn't just a holiday tale. It's a powerful reminder of the transformative power of kindness and compassion. At its core, it shows how people can change, even when circumstances seem impossible. Tanya, who initially appeared as a cold and unforgiving figure, is transformed by her encounter with Evelyn and her children. Through moments of regret, reconciliation, and understanding, we see that everyone has the capacity for growth and redemption, and sometimes it takes an unexpected act of kindness to open someone's heart. For Evelyn and her family, this story is about resilience, about how, even in the darkest times, hope and love can light the way. They faced unimaginable challenges, yet they found the strength to rebuild and embrace the new opportunities that life brought their way. We write stories like this not only to entertain but to inspire, to show that even in our most difficult moments, kindness has the power to change lives. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of empathy, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that move and inspire. Your support means the world. And by sharing, you're helping spread a message of hope and compassion to others. Stay tuned for more epic moments, and remember, the best is yet to come.